Hey Bree, come and record the Drift ad.
Today's episode is brought to you by Drift Outfitters in downtown Toronto, Ontario. Drift Outfitters is your source for all things fly fishing. From waders and boots to threads and feathers, Drift has it all. Check in on their website for the latest updates and policies regarding shopping during the pandemic. Curbside pickup for your online and phone orders is a great way to get the gear you need. And they're shipping free across Canada on orders over $100. Visit driftoutfitters.com to learn more.
Hello and welcome to another episode of So Fly. It is January, the end of January, and we're recording another show. My name is Mitch, and we've got Aldo.
Hello.
We've got Yilma.
Hello, everyone.
We're back recording. We're super excited today to be chatting with somebody, we're very excited to be chatting with because we've been planning this one for a little while. Greg French is one of Australia's best-known fishing personalities. He spends most of his time in Tasmania and New Zealand, but travels widely and is a regular contributor to premier magazines such as Fly Life. Greg's guidebook, Trout Waters of Tasmania, most recently updated in 2011, is widely considered to be the Bible of trout fishing in Tasmania. And his literary nonfiction title, Frog Call, which came out in 2002, showcased a writing style that reached well beyond the angler audience. Frog Call was followed by Artificial in 2008, Menagerie of False Truths in 2010, and Watercolor in 2018. Since then, Greg has written about global destinations, notably in The Imperiled Cutthroat and The Last Wild Trout, both in 2016. Greg's also worked with Gin Clear Media, co-writing and narrating the fly fishing documentaries Hatch and Predator and Leviathan. If you haven't seen those, check them out. They're amazing. We're super excited to be chatting today with Greg. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, yeah, man. You are one heck of an accomplished author. Just reading that bio, it's amazing.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that you sort of get into accidentally, really. So,
well, we're definitely excited to hear all about how you accidentally got into writing some incredible books. But first of all, whereabouts are you calling from today?
Okay, we're calling from Hobart in Tasmania. Hobart's the capital city. So Tasmania is an island. I don't know what I can compare it to in Canada, but it's exactly the same size as Tierra del Fuego, about 65,000 square kilometres.
Okay, right on.
We're temperate. Half of our island is wilderness, and in fact, most of that is World Heritage, and it's the only World Heritage area in the world, I believe, with wilderness in the title, Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. And the rest of the land here is either production forest or rural. Our capital city, Hobart, where I live on the outskirts, has just got 200,000 people, and the entire population is only 500,000. So
amazing.
Fairly laid back, cruisy place to be.
Yeah. Well, we definitely can't wait to talk about Tasmania. I know it's, nighttime here. It's January. It's the winter for us. It's freezing cold and we're stuck inside because of COVID. So it's really nice to be able to kind of escape and talk about warm, sunny Tasmania.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Have you been out a lot recently?
I've been out to a little place called St Clair Lagoon last week. And St Clair Lagoon is sort of epitomises Tasmanian fly fishing in that it's a lake about, I don't know. Let's say it's a kilometre diameter. Mm-hmm. And basically you can wade every square centimetre of it. The water is crystal clear and it is absolutely chock-a-block full of medium-sized brown trout, fish in the sort of 2 to 3 pound range, with a few big ones. And so you just wander around this lake looking for fish exactly as saltwater fly fishermen do for bonefish.
That's
and
awesome.
Yeah. We also, it also has really good beds of Isoetes weeds, which are fantastic for mayflies. We have a black spinner mayfly, and the fish just leap, I need to clear the water sometimes. And it's also good for blue damselflies and their leapers as well. So on a typical really good day, like the other day when we were up there, you would land 20 fish, maybe get another 20 fish to eat the fly. And
that's a pretty good day.
It's good. It's world-class fishing. There's no doubt about that.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've seen the... Go ahead, Aldo.
No, I was going to say what you were going to say, Yilma.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when Aldo sent me the pictures, the first thing I thought was like, wow, this is like saltwater sight fishing for brown trout, right? And
it's funny because here, I've not done much saltwater fly because I just haven't exhausted all the trout fishing possibilities. And when I was a little boy, I read Joe Brooks's trout fishing. It was written in 1970. I actually stole it from the library. I borrowed it from the library as an 11-year-old boy, and I loved it so much with all these exotic American trouts that I just couldn't bear to return it. So I went back. What happened at our school was a very little country school, and the library was a mobile library that would come around once a month, and it would drop books off. They'd be used for a month, and then it would come around again, drop a new lot off, and all the old books would be taken back.
Yeah.
So this book, if I returned it, I was never ever going to see it again.
Right.
So I said to the librarian, "Hey, I've lost it. I don't know where it is. I'll pay for it."
Yeah.
And she just looked at me over the top of a little wire-rimmed glasses. She knew I was lying, but I still wasn't going to give it back.
Yeah.
If necessary, I'd steal it again, actually.
So you don't still have the book. I was going to ask if you still have it.
Yeah, I still got the book.
Oh, right on.
Nice.
Yeah, so that was good. I forgot where the thread was going, by the way, but
That's okay.
if you can remember, we can pick it up again.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm guessing that by that trout season's in full swing then down there in Tasmania.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, we're again super jealous. Super
Yeah.
jealous.
So the thing with the trout season here in Tasmania is particularly we don't have that thing that happens in America where you have a big, snowfall and then everything's obliged to hatch in 2 weeks.
Right.
That just doesn't happen. It's pretty benign weather. So our mayfly will start at the beginning of the season, which is spring. The first thing that happens is we get lots of rain in spring, and Tasmania is predominantly lake fishing. It's sight fishing in lakes. We've got lots of lovely streams, but the lake fishing is so good and the trout hunting is so good that most locals prefer lake fishing, and our lakes have bigger fish. Oh. So the first thing that happens in spring is that the lake levels will come up and you'll get worms and frogs in the shallows, and the trout move into the shallows with all their fins out of the water. Mm-hmm. We call it tailing, and you just wander along the lake shore looking for a fin and try to get a fly in front of it. And then as things warm up a little bit, we get our first hatches. And in the high country, we've got a big central plateau in Tasmania, and that's about, I guess, it would average 1,000 meters above sea level.
Okay. And
that country, the hatches start as early as November, which is sort of the middle of spring, and they will go all the way through into early autumn. So we can get mayfly hatches that will last 4 or 5 months rather than that sort of big blitz that you have.
Yeah.
But the other thing we have is crystal clear water. So even when fish aren't rising, what you do see is you just see the fish moving around in the water. And the skill here is trout hunting. It's actually learning to see the fish and then learning to predict where the fish will be in the lake at any given time, so that you see more than you would if you're just going to any old random shore.
Yeah. Geez, well, that sounds like kind of like can be quite technical fishing then. Quite different.
Yeah, fishing. But it's a good fishing style in that it's very, very easy to get people addicted to it. Yeah. Because particularly when you start off, it's mainly brown trout fishing, and brown trout are certainly the least easy to catch of the trouts.
Right.
But on a given day, we can show people, literally dozens of fish cruising around in front of them. And the big problem is never the fly. The big problem is always casting ability. So you just need to get that fly 1 meter in front of the fish, and you're in with a really good chance. Yeah. And when people don't have a good day, that's because the fly isn't going exactly where it needs to go. Mm-hmm. And so they can see the problem. It's not as if, I'm sitting here throwing a lure out into nothingness, just hoping for something to grab it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You can see the fish, you have a good day. If you're not catching fish, you understand the problem and you go home and you practice. Yeah. So it's quite a good place to guide for that reason as well, that people never get bored. And if people only catch one fish or no fish for the day, they still generally had a really good day anyway.
Yeah. It's awesome. Well, that's wicked. Okay, so you've obviously had this amazing career writing about fishing and fish and destinations. But before we get into all of that in the writing career, let's just go back, right to the beginning when your passion for fly fishing began. So how did you get into fly fishing? How did that start?
I have a passion for nature. I have a passion for wild animals. And that goes back, I've got a really, really good childhood memory. I come from a family that is riddled with autism, and apparently that's why I have this good memory. But I can remember back to when I was 2 or 3 years old, and I would collect postage stamps and matchbox labels with wild animals on them. And when we went to school, we started school at 6 years old here in Tasmania. A couple of the women's magazines used to have, just before school started, labels to put on your exercise books. Okay. And I remember my sister, my brother wanted all the cars and planes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And my sister wanted all the farm animals because they're cute, little lambs and little puppies and things like that. But I was only ever interested in wild animals. And, I wanted the toucans and the kangaroos and the elephants and the walruses and things like that. And so my interest in fishing just comes about through that interest in nature. And what I loved about the fishing that I did where I grew up was that you walk along a riverbank and you could see everything that was happening underneath the water. And the reason I got into fly fishing eventually, like most people here, I started off with spinning rod, and nobody else used, of course, nobody fly fish, so that you couldn't get any lessons, and you didn't have any mentors in your family or extended friends to help you. So you start off with a spinning rod because it's easy, and what you would see is all these fish that would not eat a lure. And so then you get into fly fishing, and the great thing about fly fishing is that to do it really well, you do have to understand exactly what the fish are doing. And also, if you've got a naturally scientific mind like mine, just looking and wondering what's going on is not enough. You have to test your theories. It's just the scientific method in action. So, you can look at a fish cruising along a flat and it's eating something, and there's schools of bait fish there, and you assume that the fish is eating bait fish, but you cannot get these fish to eat a bait fish pattern.
Yeah.
But so you kill a fish and you look in its gut and you find that it's full of mayfly nymphs.
Right.
And then the question is, why do they prefer mayfly nymphs when there's so much bait fish around?
Yeah.
Right.
And so you learn this stuff, and then you try to apply that knowledge to a different lake or a different shore. And then you wonder why the mayflies are on a shore at a particular time. And you wonder whether it's to do with the substrate or whether it's to do with the wind. And then over time, you build up a big knowledge of what's going on. And when I was a young fella, you're so excited about all the stuff that you're learning. You're sort of like a new lover or something. You just want to talk to everybody about it.
Yeah, totally.
It's just so keen to let other people know, and also so keen to pick everybody else's brain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a great answer. I mean, I love that. Fly fishing really is like the ultimate activity for somebody who loves nature. Because to your point, you have to know so much more about just throwing a lure out, right? You have to understand the bugs and the cycle there and the life cycle of, what fish are into. And it's really, is that what you kind of fell in love with then, I guess, when you first got into fly fishing, was just this whole kind of holistic thing?
Yeah, to be honest with you, the very first thing I fell in love with Tasmania was exploration. So
right.
My intro into writing is really quite accidental, and it's a product of just starting my fishing career at a very fortunate point in time in Tasmania.
Right.
So when I started in the mid-1970s, first of all, there was no internet. So you couldn't just type anything up and get an answer. So you have to look for books. There were no books. Right. There were a couple of publications that purported to be guides, but they were far from comprehensive, and they were wildly inaccurate. They used to frustrate me. And because so much of Tasmania is wilderness, there was just no information on anything in the wilderness. So you would just start walking up rivers from lake to lake and going to places that at the time I thought nobody else had been to, and you would discover stuff. And then you would write it down. And then eventually I should actually tell you about our best place in Tasmania. We have, in our Central Plateau, we have a wilderness area called the Western Lakes.
Right.
And the Western Lakes is basically flattish country. One half of it is moorland and the other half of it is stunted eucalypt forest. But the lakes are all gouged out by an ice sheet, so they're predominantly shallow, full of clear water. There are no walking tracks, but you just think up any route you want to go, and you can walk for, it's probably, I guess, 30 kilometres both ways, east, west, north, south.
Yeah.
And just go to wherever you want.
It's pretty big.
And at the time, there was no information on that. And so you walk up the way I approached it was you would walk up a river system from lake to lake. There are, depending on how small you want to go to define a lake, anywhere between 1,000 and 4,000 lakes in this area.
Wow.
You'd follow up a river system and you go from lake to lake to lake, and you would notice things. You'd notice changes in substrate, and you would notice that some lakes had little fish and some lakes, and lots of little fish, and some lakes had just giant fish, 10-pound plus fish.
Trout, we're talking trout, right? Like mostly all trout.
Yeah, they're brown trout.
That's so crazy.
It is crazy. And none of these lakes were ever stocked. So Tasmania was stocked with brown trout, obviously. They were in the southern hemisphere.
Right.
But they were put in lowland rivers, and they just worked their way up into these systems through a process of natural recruitment and invasion.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And so then you would find lakes that apparently had no fish in them, and you would wonder why they have no fish in them. And generally, it was a substantial barrier like a waterfall.
Right.
Sometimes not quite so substantial, and you'd wonder why, what was going on there biologically. But you do end up with a body of knowledge that you realise that nobody else has. And when I started off, you'd look at, like, there are a couple of walking tracks. So I started off on the walking tracks, and you would get to a lake and you'd fish it for a week only to learn that there were no fish in that lake. And then you'd bump into some local walking past who would say, gee guys, there's no fish in this lake, but if you walk 2 kilometres down the valley, you'll find a lake that's full of rainbow trout. And so you'd walk down there and you'd think, if only I'd known that, I'm 18 years old, I'm excited, I want to catch fish, and I wasted a week on a lake with no fish in it. And then you'd wonder, why rainbow trout? What was the history behind that? They had to be put there. It's above a waterfall. Generally, it's brown trout in Tasmania. And then you would get little clues when you were talking to people, and you'd eventually track down the person who actually put them in there by airdrop.
Right.
And that they were ripping yarns. Every time you talk to these old hands, they were ripping yarns. So with the Lake Meston story, where the rainbows were, it was a fishing club got permission from the government to drop rainbow trout into this lake. But on the day that and this was in the mid-1950s, on the day that they flew the plane out, the weather was atrocious. And so there was a clearing, and they thought, beauty, Lake Adelaide was the destination. That's Lake Adelaide below us. They dropped these bags of fry into the lake. And then for several years, everyone went to Lake Adelaide and didn't catch a fish. It took a while to twig that perhaps we've dropped them in the wrong lake, which they had.
That's amazing. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
That's so funny. So how long did you kind of explore the area of Tasmania and this area before writing the book? Well,
okay. So you've got to imagine that I'm 18 and I think I know a lot more than I actually do. And I've never written before. And so writing is very hard. I've got a lot to say, and I don't really know how to say it succinctly. So it was quite a struggle. I just actually started off documenting everything I knew, and then putting each lake in alphabetical order and just writing notes. And then I thought I had enough to write something that might be useful to other people. And at the time, we had an Inland Fisheries Commission. So it was the statutory body responsible for looking after our inland fishery. And they had a new commissioner, a young fellow who at the time I think was the youngest head of department ever in Tasmania. A fellow by the name of Rob Sloan. And your listeners should Google up Rob Sloan. The man is extraordinary. And he had just written a book. This is 1983. He'd just written a book called The Truth About Trout. And what was amazing about this book was that everything else I'd read, let's go back a step too. In Tasmania, our fishing conditions mirror more what you would have in the UK. Whereas in New Zealand, the fishing conditions mirror more what you've got in North America. So in New Zealand, you've got big freestone rivers, which is what most people fish, and you've got all that American style stuff going on. But in Tasmania, the streams that we have are genteel meadow streams, and the lakes are wild, more like you'd get in Ireland or Scotland, which means that we were heavily influenced by UK literature, and New Zealand was heavily influenced by North American literature. So for me, when I'm reading all this stuff, I'm reading, GM skews, and I'm reading and it's all about, this is a nymph and this is a dry fly, and this is why you would use a nymph instead of a dry fly. And even with the American stuff in New Zealand, it followed a similar pattern. It was like, this is a dry fly, this is how you use it. This is a nymph, this is how you use it. This is a streamer, this is how you use it.
Yeah.
Well, Rob turned all that on its head with his book. It was like, this is what you're going to find trout doing in Tasmania. Okay, number one, they will tail in shallow water. You'll be walking on the lake shore and there will be fins sticking out of the water.
Yeah.
How do you approach that fish?
Mm-hmm.
You will find fish leaping out of the water. You'll find them leaping a metre out of the water. What are they doing? How do you target them?
Mm-hmm.
You'll find fish sipping, like porpoising on a lake. What happens there?
Mm-hmm.
You will find fish smashing into schools of migratory whitebait, bait fish.
Right.
What do you do? And so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that really got me was a chapter on wind lanes. Now, I don't know if you in Canada know much about wind lanes, but if you're on a lake or the ocean, you'll see either strips of froth on a lake.
Okay.
Or if the lake is calm and there's no froth around, what you'll see is sort of ripply water, but then like a stream of oily calm running down the lake.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, it's like a current almost.
Yeah, and they're currents. They're currents. And what those currents do is they're spiraling currents, and they funnel everything that's on the surface and a little bit underneath the surface into the middle of that.
Okay.
So Rob was probably the first person in the world to have actually noted this and worked out that trout love this stuff.
Oh, wow.
And they get into these currents and they feed on midges, chironomids, predominantly, and also terrestrial beetles here in Tasmania. Mm. And I'd never noticed this. I read this book. I went out to the lake. I found my first wind lane, and it was chock-a-block full of fish.
Really?
In a lake where you never
cool.
see fish.
Wow.
Nice. Yeah.
That's amazing.
And of course, I've applied that knowledge, as have a heap of my contemporaries all over the world now, and it happens everywhere in the world. It's just a thing that is always there.
That's cool.
So that book was a heavy influence for me. Mm-hmm. And so I approached Rob when I wanted to write my own book, and I said to him, how did you go about publishing it? Yeah. And he self-published it and had done it really well. And he gave me the name of the graphic designer and the printer. But then it was up to me to distribute it. And the first book, and I look back on it, I think it was a guidebook. It was scant. There was so much stuff I was so naive. I didn't know I was naive.
Yeah.
But because it was the only book available in Tasmania at the time, people bought it. What I had to do was like literally pack all these books into the back of a station wagon, drive it around to random shops selected out of a phone book, and walk into the shop and say, will you sell these books? And Tasmania being a small community, people were actually really good. They didn't do it on consignment. They would buy them in advance.
Wow.
Never expecting to sell many of them, never expecting.
Yeah.
But I got home after my first day of delivery, and there were second orders coming through.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
Books sold like hotcakes. Like I say, it's nothing grand. You can probably find a copy on the internet or something. Yeah. But I kept updating that book. It kept selling out.
Yeah.
So we've got, like, say, 500,000 people in Tasmania, and that first print run, 10,000 books just gone.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you couldn't do that now.
Good problem to have.
On the internet.
Well, that's it.
Everything's on the internet.
Yeah.
It was just like completely accidental.
Well,
had there been one other person who was more skilled than me, I wouldn't have got a shoe in, I tell you.
That's awesome. Well, it's interesting you say that. Like, obviously there was a community there, right, that wanted to learn about fly fishing in that region. I mean, there's two things. I think one is talking about, when you were looking at books from before, and they were like, this is what a dry fly is, this is what a nymph is. It took people writing about, like, no, this is how you fish in this specific place to really kind of crack open that literary kind of like, oh, that's interesting, when we're talking about just Tasmania. I think that's awesome. Because we've all read those books, right? This is a nymph. This is a streamer.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, like we get it. You know?
Doesn't necessarily apply to your own
Yeah.
streams or rivers or lakes. Yeah.
Yeah. But, you had this region in Tasmania that you were fishing and you learned all about it and you really started to understand it. What compelled you to go, oh, I'm going to tell everybody about it? What was it? What was the reason why you were like, I want to write a book documenting this, And I know maybe it was to inspire just like yourself, 11-year-olds to get out fishing, but what was it? Like, why did you do it?
Okay. I've got two answers to that.
Okay.
I'll give you what is probably closer to the truth, which isn't as dramatic. Basically, you've got a naturally scientific mind, so it's collating and collecting and then trying to work out patterns. Mm-hmm. And you've done that work, and basically you just want to show it to people.
Right. Yeah.
And that's it, really.
Yeah, I get that.
But then, what I thought at the time, mm-hmm. and what actually happened later on, was that it got into being a much greater good. So a lot of the work that I do now is very conservation based, and particularly in the era of climate change. But even when I was a young fella, Tasmania, like a lot of rural outposts, has two things going on. It's got a big, what we would call redneck community. Mm-hmm. I say that with affection because I grew up in a logging town. The rednecks are my friends.
Right.
I'm just trying to, like, simple words, get you that group of people. And then we've got this big arts community. Mm-hmm. And politicians work to create divisions in society that don't normally exist, that wouldn't exist if it wasn't for politicians. Yeah. And they wedge that all the time. Mm-hmm. It's how they get power. And so in Tasmania, they've done it, and they've pitted environmentalists against workers the whole time. So as I grew up in a little town on the East Coast, we suddenly had a wood chip industry, a logging industry that was incredibly destructive. Yeah. All my favourite places that I visited were in danger of being destroyed, every last one of them. So what is advocacy equals protection. And if you don't have advocacy, you have no protection. So my first introduction into writing, it was much more vain than that. But by the time I'd upgraded to the third edition of the book, I'm really, really interested in preserving this massive area called the Western Lakes, which had no protections at the time. Mm-hmm. Right. We worked hard to get it created in a national park, and we worked even harder to get it as a World Heritage Area. Yep. And then you're struck with a problem, which one of the big attractions in the Western Lakes is that sense of independent discovery. The idea that you're just walking in a place that is pure wilderness, it's untracked, and to discover a lake that suddenly has 10-pound brown trout cruising around in it. It's different to if you someone tells you that it's there and everybody's going there. Yeah. Right. So it's like, how can you promote it, but at the same time retain that sense of awe when people go there? Mm-hmm. And in the end, what I opted to do was to come up with a heap of recipes so that if you want to catch tailing fish, these are the things to look for in the lakes. And I'll tell you one or two so you can get a taste for it. Yeah. But the others, you're going to have to use your initiative to find them. That's great. It's pretty simple. If you don't have to use much initiative, you're going to find them. If you want to find trophy trout, big trout, this is the recipe. This is why these lakes have trophy trout in them. And you can find them. Basically, they're isolated headwater lakes with hardly any recruitment. Small number of fish, lots of food equals big fish. Yeah. Again, with the mayfly lakes and everything else, you need isoetes weed for good mayflies in the Western Lakes. And you can see it. Just look into the water and see that there or it's not. And so you end up with a bunch of recipes, 20 or 30 of them for people to be able to find the way around. And I always nominate a couple of lakes where you can get a feel for that style of fishing, and then it's up to you. Yeah. That seems to have worked. That's a great answer. That's such an enormous passion in the community, which means that at the moment we have, in the era of Donald Trump's influence is global, and it's very, very destructive. And it's given the more extreme end of the right wing license to do all sorts of undermining of our democracy. And here in Tasmania, it's been, how can we undermine our national park system? We really do, we loathe the idea of land being public. It should be for our mates to make money out of. And so the state government at the moment is looking, it has actually begun privatising the Western Lakes.
Really? Wow.
Yep, just giving, like the first one is a 10-hectare island given to one of its mates. Not only did the public not know about this, the public was legally not allowed to know about this.
Jeez.
It's about as Trumpian as you can get.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. And so we and unfortunately the developer used to be a friend of mine as well.
Oh, really?
But yeah, so it's quite hard stuff to deal with.
Yeah.
But having done that, building up this advocacy for the region, the government really has bitten off more than it can chew. You know, we've been fighting this now for 5 years. We've been able to get enough donations to take it through to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
Ultimately, we will win this battle. We could not have done that without advocacy. We could not have done it if myself and a whole bunch of other people hadn't been writing and promoting and looking at sensitive ways of promoting that don't actually destroy the very thing that you love.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is an amazing answer.
Yeah.
And you know what? Like, honestly, like a lot of people listening need to hear that, because we get so many people that complain about, fly fishing pictures and podcasts. They're like, you guys have a podcast, you're the worst. You know, you give away all the fishing spots. It's like, no, we don't. No, we don't. We just give you the recipe, like you're saying, you know, of how to go and catch stuff. But like the adventure is going to the lakes and discovering it for yourself, right?
Yep, definitely. The other thing too is that you need to make fly fishing, particularly in Tasmania, if you don't have a mentor and you don't have a guide, is the most difficult fishing in the world, I believe. I travel a lot and I fish a lot all over the world, and I have not found a place that is technically more challenging than Tasmania. That said, that doesn't mean you're not going to catch fish, because you are.
Right.
But if you're a ranked beginner starting off by yourself with a fly rod, you really aren't going to catch too many fish. You're going to have a lot of blank days.
Yeah.
And that's off-putting. That means that if you go out again and again and again and you don't have success, you'd end up doing some other sport.
Yeah.
Right.
So what we try to do, or what I've tried to do in writing and is working as a guide, is to get enough success very early on in a person's fishing career that they want to pursue it further.
Yeah.
And that means that, you know, we have big, mainly hydroelectric lakes here in Tasmania that have zillions of fish in them, and again, world-class fishing that you can take beginners to and make sure that they catch fish pretty quickly. And that when they've had their first few days of doing this, they can just take that away and use it themselves. And it's quite interesting. Tasmania is small, and pretty much everywhere I go now, people I don't know recognise me, and they all want to thank myself and Rob Sloan and a bunch of other people for making their early fishing days successful.
It's amazing. Yeah.
And that's it's flattering, and it's a good thing. But it also makes me realise that if you want to protect an environment, a certain number of people have to get out there and do the footwork. They have to get out there and do the promotional work.
Yes.
What I have noticed is over time that young people tend to be too busy following their passion to be politically motivated. And then people get to be sort of middle-aged, and suddenly they have a little bit more time on their hand and they want to give something back, and they understand the nature of politics more. They understand that every protection is only temporary. It's only there for as long as the community support that protection.
Yeah.
So we have this core body of people that are mainly, 35 to 50 and older, that are the forefront of our conservation movement here. But then when there is an issue like the current one with the Western Lakes, we have lots of young people in their early 20s who are prepared to get out there and do the hard work, providing that a mechanism has been set up for them to make it fairly easy to lobby and protest.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're like 100% right. You know, you have to have those, and in Tasmania, the advocacy there's a pretty good base of people that are fighting for the greater good. I take it.
Yeah, definitely. But also there's the usual
Like
people, a smaller group of people with a lot of money and a lot of determination, and
Right.
you don't win every battle.
Yeah, it's amazing how the story is the same everywhere. You know,
Everywhere.
It's crazy.
Everywhere.
Heard the story so many times, you know, talking to people on the podcast, and I don't know. It's, you know, it's good that but you know, like to your point, when you write and you get this out there, people get excited, inspired, and they fight for it, and that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember your first fish on the fly rod? We kind of just skipped over that.
Oh yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm walking in the Western Lakes and I'm seeing lots and lots and lots of fish that I simply will not eat a lure. So basically here, if the weather's rough and particularly early on in the season and the water's high, fish are really quite aggressive, and they will eat lures. And then as spring turns into summer, the water's shallower, it's clear, there's blue sky, and brown trout really don't want to eat lures. They just do. But you'll see them, and they're everywhere, and you can't catch them. Yeah. So I knew I had to fly fish. And I'd been carrying a fly rod. No one to teach me how to fly fish. Yeah. Couldn't cast the damn thing. Didn't know how to cast, but been carrying it around with me for ages. And I'm in this little remote part of the Western Lakes, lake called Lake Naomi. And there's a spinner hatch going on. There's fish on the edge of the Pinrush marshes leaping out of the water. And when they hit the water, you can then spot them as they're tracking their next mayfly. And I can't catch them. And I thought, well, I'm going to take my spinning rod, I'm going to leave it at camp, and I'm only going to carry my fly rod. So I walked around the lake for the whole day doing really shitty casts and not looking like catching anything.
Yeah. And
then miraculously, late in the day, a fly fell close enough to a fish for the fish to come up and eat my fly. And it came from 2 meters away. You could see the whole thing, swimming up, wide open mouth, clomping over the fly. And I couldn't believe it when I set the hook and it was on.
Yeah.
I love that.
And I never picked up a spinning rod again after that.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think trout, you know, what was it about the trout that made like, why do they thrive in that area? Like, are there other indigenous species of fish there, or did they just?
No, so Tasmania doesn't really have. So what we have are eels.
Okay.
We have a little native bait fish called galaxids. The biggest of those grow about the size of a Cuban cigar. We have a couple of other little fish. We've got little freshwater flathead, and we've got a thing in some northern rivers, a native fish called blackfish.
Okay.
But there is absolutely nothing that in any way would be a sport fish. There's nothing that you can hunt.
Right.
You can catch these fish on a worm and a hook, but you can't really hunt any of these fish.
Right.
I think for me personally, what I found attractive about trout is all that stuff that you've read as a child. They're romantic animals, and there's been so much fine literature written about them, not just about catching fish, but so much poetic stuff. And we did have a Tasmanian author who grew up in the UK, came here as a young man, and wrote some of the finest fishing books ever. His name was David Scholes. And a book that you might want to look up is called Fly Fisher in Tasmania.
Okay.
This is beautiful writing. So in addition to being instructional, there are passages there that even now just take my breath away for the beauty of the writing.
Yeah.
So we're fortunate to have that. That sort of added that mystique about fly fishing. But then as you get to know the fish more, you realise that I don't know of any other fish that behaves in such diverse ways. I don't know any other fish that is so suited to the hunting method that we use, that sight fishing. I mean, I personally never cast unless I see a fish. We don't have to in Tasmania. The fish are there. You just need to know where to see them.
Clear water.
Yeah. And even if we have some waters that aren't so clear, but things happen in those waters. There, you will look for fish smashing bait fish or rising or whatever.
Yeah.
Any structure in those areas?
Yeah. But a lot of the structure here will be mainly at the edges of marshes, and perhaps in spring, some of our lakes will come and rivers will come up and they will flood the forest, and the structure then are the actual protruding trees.
Mm-hmm.
But what's amazing here in Tasmania, you can have lakes with absolutely no apparent structure, just a lake that's say 10 hectares big with a smooth silt bottom, nothing, not a skerrick of weed or anything on it, full of fish. They love it. They get,
Is that because there's no like direct predator for the trout, or like, I mean, I feel like
there's certainly nothing here that's evolved to eat a trout, but we do have a sea eagle, which is very much like a bald eagle to look at, and maybe that is part of it. Maybe it is that there are no natural predators, but in truth, similar water all over the world, everywhere I've been, the fish behave the same.
Right.
So I've not really found a place where they behave too differently.
Right.
In Tasmania, the sight fishing techniques that were developed here, they apply all over the world. But similarly, the techniques that developed in America and the UK and Europe, proponents come to Tasmania and apply those techniques. The UK one's interesting because they've developed a whole heap of techniques that are designed to catch stocked fish in reservoirs. And they look absurd, they're lock-style techniques with 3 flies on the end of a long floppy rod.
Blobs and boobies and whatnot.
Yeah, and check nymphing too in our creeks. They all work. And they work for wild fish every bit as well as they work for stockfish.
Yeah.
Right.
So we can learn something. But the problem for us in Tasmania is we have quite a good contingent of world-class fly fishers that go into the World Fly Fishing Championships.
Yep.
They usually perform really well. But every one of, and generally, if you want to catch lots of fish and win a World Fly Fishing Championship, you are doing things like lock-style fishing or check nymphing.
Totally.
Right.
But every one of these guys, when they're doing fishing by themselves, they don't do that stuff. They sight fish like the rest of us.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, of course. Because why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Why? Okay, here's a question for you. And this might sound kind of rudimentary, but I've seen a lot of pictures of fish in Tasmania and New Zealand, and they're massive. Why are they so big down there? What's going on? Like, what are they?
Okay. So let's do that. Well, first, the simple answer is one, I don't know, but I'll give you the Tasmanian rundown first. Tasmanian fish are generally, on average, smaller than New Zealand fish, and substantially so. So, in our lakes, some lakes you're looking at fish that are typically 1.5 pounds to 2.5 pounds.
Okay.
And in other lakes, in our best lakes, you're looking for fish that sort of average 3 pounds or a little bit better. In New Zealand, similar water, you would be looking at fish that are more like 4 or 5 pound average. But also in Tasmania, we have these trophy lakes that I was telling you about, the 10-pound fish, but they're a tiny percent of the actual available water in Tasmania, minuscule.
Right.
And there, the dynamic is easy to pick. It is just availability of food. So small population, lots of food equals a small number of big fish.
Right.
Right.
Not much food, lots of recruitment equals a huge head of smaller fish.
Yeah.
And that's being a little bit simplistic, but that's pretty much how it
Typically,
works.
Yeah.
In New Zealand, they obviously have a whole heap more production, but it is hard to see. Like the big freestone rivers, they are crystal clear water running over polished cobbles. There's no weed. There's nothing there. You can turn over a rock and sure there's nymphs there, but you can do that in Tasmania too.
Yeah.
But clearly it is a function of food. And the other thing I wouldn't say in New Zealand, I used to think that maybe the population of fish had to be smaller, but it's not. Like you can walk up a freestone river in New Zealand and see literally hundreds of fish.
Jeez.
So, but there is something going on there.
Something's
and if I had another lifetime, I'd try and work it out.
Yeah.
But here's the thing I want to talk about with New Zealand. What makes the fish really big in New Zealand?
Yeah.
And for people who in Canada who aren't really familiar with where we live, Southeast Australia, Victoria, the states of Victoria and New South Wales, and our island state of Tasmania, it's all Gondwanan. And so that means the rainforest is all the same. We have the same genera in our rainforest. And, you know, it was all joined together with Antarctica, and so too New Zealand. So and for me, that is my home. My home is New Zealand, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania.
Okay.
Queensland, tropical Australia, the desert, Western Australia, they're foreign countries to me.
Right.
They're
Okay.
Far,
got it.
really,
far away.
I don't,
Yeah.
it's not that I do not consider those places home at all, but New Zealand is my home. It's only a 3-hour flight across the Tasman Sea.
Yeah.
Culturally, it's very much like Tasmania, and environmentally, other than the big rivers that we don't have in Tasmania, it's very, very much the same. But the predominant tree in Tasmanian rainforests and New Zealand rainforests is a Nothofagus. And the Nothofagus are Gondwanan. They're found only in the Southern Hemisphere. In Tasmania, we've got 2 species of them. In New Zealand, they've got 5. Argentina, Chile, I think they've got 11. Because that's the other thing, you go to Argentina and Chile, it's just like being in Tasmania.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in Argentina and Chile and in Tasmania and southeastern Australia, the Nothofagus trees flower and they produce seeds, but not so much.
Right.
In New Zealand, their Nothofagus trees undergo mass flowering every 4 or 5 years. And what this does, it precipitates mouse plagues.
Okay.
They have to be seen to be believed. I did send you guys some photos of the mice.
I spelled it right.
Yes.
That was last January, which happened to be the mass flowering is called a mast year. That happened to be the biggest mast year in living memory, and perhaps the biggest ever. It was phenomenal. And you walk in, explain the rainforest, closed canopy rainforest with moss understory.
Okay.
So you can just walk anywhere in a rainforest.
That's beautiful.
And in New Zealand, when you're walking through, and it's mast year, you have mice everywhere sitting on tree trunks, running along the tracks.
Oh my
in front
God.
of you.
Those are those
Use one of the if you use one of the backcountry huts, they're just running around on tables and out the doors. And they don't even want to pinch your food, because what they want are the seeds of the Nothofagus trees.
Right.
Yeah.
Solely
So what
focused
you
on the
have is
seeds.
a bunch of mice in the forest.
Yeah.
That now local law has it that the trees ferment on the seeds, and the mice eat the seeds and get drunk.
So there's a bunch of drunk mice running
I don't know
around.
whether it's true or not,
I love
but what's undoubted is that the mice fall into the water regularly, and the trout and the eels love it. They just gobble them. So in a backcountry river, where the fish might be typically 6 or 7 pounds, 3 months into a mast year, they're 10, 11, 12 pounds.
Jesus.
And not only
I'm
that,
okay with that.
most of the fishing is done at night.
Yeah.
When the mice are most active. And in the daytime, when you're walking up the rivers, you'll see these giant fish just hanging in the current, and they've eaten so much in the night that sometimes they're just not interested. They're just sleeping off. They're just not interested. This last mast year, there were so many mice around that there were still mice running and falling into the water all day long. There were owls out hunting in the daytime.
Wow.
Because there's just so much food available.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was absolutely brilliant for catching mouse feeders in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
Oh, that must have been fantastic.
Yeah, so that's an event that actually you can actually see in those years why New Zealand fish would be bigger than a Tasmanian fish.
Got it. Makes sense.
That's an amazing. It's almost like a mouse hatch or something, you know? It's like
It is a mouse hatch.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
wild.
And here's an interesting thing. I've travelled a lot, and I have known of like random mouse plague events. They will happen anywhere randomly. But I've always thought that New Zealand was the only place in the world that had a regular mouse event. And like I say, it's typically 4 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And news gets out pretty quickly nowadays on social media, so you can just fly over there and get in amongst it. Last year, my wife and I went to South America.
Yeah.
So in February, we were in the Lakes District in Argentina.
Okay.
Now, the one difference between Argentinian rainforest and the forest we have here in Australia and New Zealand is they have a plant we don't have, which is bamboo.
Right.
And I don't know if you guys have been to Argentina, but
Not yet.
It's called Kanya. Yeah, Kanya Clearway. You cannot walk through it. It is just
Wow.
a unbelievable barrier. And so that lovely freedom we have in Tasmania of New Zealand of just being able to wander anywhere through our rainforest just doesn't exist there.
Okay.
Now, Kanya Clearway, apparently it flowers, but it flowers once every 70 years.
70 years. Wow.
Every 70 years. And when it does flower, it's generally quite localized. So, you know, you'll get a little patch of rats and mice, but it might only be in an area of 30,000 hectares or something like that.
Right.
And it's, you know, or 16,000 hectares or 10,000 hectares. But over the last 3 years in Argentina, for some unknown reason, probably linked to climate change, all their Kanya, pretty much every last bit of it has flowered.
Oh, man.
And it precipitated a mouse plague on par with the stuff that I've seen in New Zealand. And there's some great stories. Now, again, this might be a myth, but this was told to us by so many local anglers that I just love it anyway. I don't care if it's a lie.
Yeah.
Kanya Clearway seeds, a little black seed, and they fall to the forest floor. And I reckon it can be like, you know, hundreds of tons per hectare of seed when it happens.
Right.
And they swell up enormously when they're wet.
Okay.
So the mice go down, they get a belly full of seeds, and then they're really thirsty. So they go and have a drink and they explode.
Oh my God, because they ate so much. Yeah.
Because they ate so much. Oh my God.
That's hilarious. That's amazing. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, mice exploding.
So you're just fishing and you're just hearing like,
Pop, pop.
I don't know. I don't know. We were there at the very tail end of the mouse hatch in Argentina, and so the fish, the mice weren't there in any profusion, and the fish obviously had nothing to feed on, and so what we were seeing were fish that were in rather poor condition because they had this big availability of food. They've got really big, and now that food resource is gone, and there's nothing to sustain them.
right.
But what was good about being there at this time was that a lot of the backcountry cabins and stuff had been closed because there, with their mouse plagues, the mice and rats carry hantavirus, or antivirus as they call it in Argentina, which can be deadly. So a lot of the refugios and that had closed down because even touching any surfaces that are contaminated is a potential risk. The other thing that happened because of this was when the Kanya seeds, it dies, and then it has to grow. The new forest, Kanya forest, has to grow up from seed. For the rest of the life cycle, it's growing from rhizomes. But what that means is you've got this enormous amount of dry Kanya in the rainforest.
Yeah.
And so the locals set fire to the Kanya to kill the rats and mice.
Oh, wow.
But this is Gondwana rainforest. If you get a fire in it, it isn't coming back anytime soon.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's quite a lot of extensive fire damage in a lot of my favourite forests. Had been severely affected by
By fire. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But then it did give you unprecedented ability just to walk around without being
that's right.
impeded by Kanya.
No way. And regrowth after that, I suppose. So that was last February you said you did that trip?
That was last February, yeah.
Right on. So like right at the beginning of this whole COVID thing.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. They were really worried about hantavirus there. It sort of paled into insignificance with COVID.
With COVID, yeah.
Yeah.
So you were over there for, how long were you over there for?
We were over there for a few months in the end.
Nice.
But there was no COVID in South America when we finished Argentina, and then we flew to Cusco in Peru.
Nice.
To go and have a look at Machu Picchu. Now, what you guys might not know is that Machu Picchu is in the Sacred Valley in Peru, and the river that runs through the Sacred Valley, the Urubamba, or I think the locals call it the Vilcanota, is a rainbow stream, a rainbow trout stream.
No way.
Yeah. So you can catch.
Did you fish it?
3-pound rainbow.
Did you fish it?
Yeah.
So you were fishing
It was
like
in
right
flood
by
when we were
You're fishing in Machu Picchu.
Machu Picchu. That's amazing.
fishing in. Yeah, you can actually catch 3-pound rainbow trout in winter. If you go there in winter, when it's not flooded, it's a crystal clear freestone river full of 3-pound rainbow trout that you're welcome to fish.
That's amazing. Oh my
That's
God.
great.
It is amazing.
That's so cool.
So, but our plane landed at Cuzco, and I walked out of the airport, and a local Quechua woman there said to me, she recognised I speak reasonable Spanish, but I have a heavy Australian accent.
Right.
And she said, "Oh, golly, you must be from Australia. You need to get hold of your embassy. The country's going into lockdown in 3 hours' time."
In 3 hours.
And, yeah, it was 9 o'clock at night, and midnight the lockdown, and they only announced it now beforehand.
Oh my God.
So we got that. It was the first country in the world to go into lockdown.
Wow.
They did it really well. We're looking at, this must have been mid-March, I guess.
Yep.
14, something like that. Now, I wanted to actually, in addition to the rivers, there are in Peru some really good rainbow lakes in the high hills above 4,000 meters. The problem with fishing those is that, I don't know how to say it in English, but probably for want of a better word in English, it's tribal land.
Okay.
So you really do need to know people to get up there to fish these places.
Yeah.
So I had found a local Quechua guy that could take us up there. And luckily I'd been conversing with him on the internet. And when we landed, he said, he gave us a phone call and said, "We're going to lock down 3 hours' time. You don't want to be in Cuzco. You're going to be stuck in your motel room for at least 2 weeks, more likely longer than that. I'm going to pick you up right now. We won't pick you up in the morning, and I'll take you down to the Sacred Valley. You'll have a lot more freedom down there."
Wow. That is a wild way to start your visit there.
Yeah, but we're in this tiny little town, first town up from Machu Picchu, called Ollantaytambo, which is a Inca town. People still living these are thoroughly modern people, by the way, thoroughly modern people, but they still live in the buildings that were built by the Inca 500-600 years ago, and they still use a Quechua lifestyle that dates back 2,000 years. So it's an extraordinary place to be stuck.
That's like during a lockdown too. It's like
Yeah.
traveling through time, that's
And we were allowed a few more freedoms than they had elsewhere in Peru. Every town was locked down. You certainly could not go from one town to another. But the military police did allow us to walk up on hills on trails that had no people on them. So we were far better off than we would have been elsewhere. The big problem for us was simply getting back to Australia, because Australia closed its borders. And
Right.
Yeah.
That is such an amazing place to be stuck at such a strange time. The whole world stops and is standing still, and you're kind of like almost alone in this extremely like remote place. Like that's got to be such a weird feeling.
It was a weird feeling, and actually being in Peru was not a problem for us. But like I said, the stress all came from trying to get back home to Australia.
Back home, yes.
Yeah. Well, geez, fishing near Machu Picchu. I mean, that is something I could get into, especially right now.
Absolutely.
Man, that's amazing. Mitchie's Fishies 5?
Sure.
Okay,
Wait,
so yes.
Well, I mean, go ahead. I mean, I'm not the guest. I'm just going to grab another 40 Creek.
Of course, please grab some.
Please.
Okay.
Please.
We so Greg, we do something at the end of every show where we ask the same 5 questions to every guest, and they're just more fishing questions, just kind of broad fishing questions, but just 5 more of them, and we ask everybody. So I'm gonna ask you them now, and you can just take as long as you want to answer them. We could spend the next hour if you want. It doesn't have to be a quick sentence.
It's not a buzzer beater or anything.
No. Okay, so the first one is, what is your favorite fish and why?
Okay, my favorite fish is the brown trout.
Okay.
And the brown trout, why? Because it behaves in an incredible diversity of ways, and every one of those ways it behaves offers opportunities for sight fishing, for trout hunting. And the other thing about it is that it's a hard fish to catch.
Right.
So it's easy enough that you can get rank beginners to catch fish on their first day out with a fly. But it's hard enough that after fishing for 50 years, you still don't know enough about it. And there are still days when you simply cannot catch these things. Now, I'll give you a comparison with rainbow trout. So statistically around the world, if you have a lake or a river with equal numbers of brown and rainbow trout in it, generally there are differences from location to location, but generally what you're going to do is find that anglers will catch 4 times as many rainbow trout as browns,
Right.
even though the numbers are the same, because they're easier to catch.
Yeah.
In New Zealand, the North Island of New Zealand is predominantly rainbow trout. It's got some wonderful brown trout fishing as well, but rainbow trout are what people go to the North Island for. And in their backcountry rivers in the rainforest, above waterfalls, there are a number of rivers where you're looking to sight fish to rainbow trout that are in that 8 to 10 on a mouse year, even 12, 13, 14 pound bracket.
It's pretty awesome.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And you can basically catch everyone you see. If you can cast well, you'll catch everyone you see.
Oh my God.
In a mouse year or when the cicadas are on, they're pretty easy to catch. So I don't fish. I only fish the North Island probably once a year.
Yeah.
I don't fish it enough to get sick of doing that. It's very special fishing, but my friends who live in New Zealand don't do that anymore. It is just too easy. There's no challenge.
Oh my God.
They liken it to trying to play competitive tennis with a 7-year-old.
Right.
There's no joy in it.
Yeah.
They'll go and have fun there. They'll take mates there and they'll have a fun day, just as the same way you can hit a tennis ball around with a 7-year-old and have a lot of fun. But it's not what they're going to do.
It's no
themselves.
challenge.
Yeah. Where the brown trout, it just requires that little bit more finesse, and to do well at it, then you're at the peak of your game when you're doing well at it.
Yeah. No, it's 100% true. Brown trout fishing is quite difficult everywhere. I mean, everywhere, even down here, it's like very tricky. But I can't wait to get back out and fish for browns. Oh my God. Okay. Number 2 is if you could fish anywhere in the world right now, assuming COVID's not a thing and it's the best season to go fishing in that place, where would you go and why would you go to that place?
Oh, okay. So we can't, the best, they're hard, aren't they? Best movie, best book, best.
The best.
Off the top of my head, I'm going to tell you my 5 favorite fisheries globally. And I actually recommend these as the best fisheries in the world, but I'll give you some parameters. For me, the best fisheries have to have wild fish. They have to have a natural environment. They have to opportunities for sight fishing, and they need to offer an opportunity that is available nowhere else in the world. So that's how I would define best fisheries in the world.
Okay.
And
the parameters are good. I like that.
My favorites are, in no particular order, South Island backcountry fishing for brown trout, North Island backcountry fishing for rainbow trout, Mongolia's Taman and Lennox fishery, Yellowstone's cutthroat fishery, just because, again, landscapes and culture in Yellowstone are just amazing, and Tasmania's Western Lakes.
Nice.
And Tasmania's Western Lakes is absolutely unique in the world, and it sounds like I'm biased because I'm a Tasmanian. Trust me, I'm not. I don't have a patriotic bone in my body, but it is just extraordinary to have, perhaps 4,000 lakes that anybody can walk to in a wilderness area where you don't even need hiking tracks. You're not going to see anyone else. And the walking is so easy. One of the great things about it too, we don't have bears and stuff like that.
Okay.
All you're going to see out there are like wallabies and echidnas and platypuses, and you can set your camp up and just leave it and just,
like, you're safe.
Yeah. So any one of those places I would fish.
It's a great parameters. I mean, I agree with them. I think that's so true. I gotta see this Western Lakes area. It sounds absolutely insane.
It is insane. It really is insane. Yeah.
I love it. Okay. Keeping in with the bests and favorites, you're right. That's exactly what these 5 questions are. They're bests and favorites. We've had people on the show be like, I don't know my favorite fishes. Like, ask me something better. I'm like, I don't know. Like, the third question in the Mitchie's Fishies 5 is, what is your favorite or one of your favorite fishing memories? Just one of your favorite fishing memories.
Okay. Well, I have a few of them, and let me think. I'll give you 2.
Okay.
So many.
I know.
2 I love talking about. Okay, we were fishing in Mongolia on the Anongol, the Anon River.
That's so cool.
And we were fishing for taimen. And I was in control of the raft, and we're drifting around a a big bend on this big river, and my wife's fishing. And my wife is a really, really good fisherman. I think a little bit kudos here. She is actually my rock. She is my editor. She's an all-round sports girl at school.
Yeah.
So, learned to double haul. Mm-hmm. It took her a minute. She actually did a 25-meter cast to a fish by me explaining what a double haul was.
It took me 6 years. 6 years.
Yeah. So she's a very, very good fisherman. And we were drifting down the river. We went down a big bend with an eddy in it, and she's stripping a mouse fly across the top of the water, and a giant taiman came up. It's the biggest taiman I've seen. It would be 1.5 meters long. Yeah. It's got the head the size of a round mouth shovel. It's come up to eat her fly just as she's lifting the fly off the water. And the fly leaves the water, and it's got its head out of the water, chomping like an angry shark, thinking, where the hell is this fly gone?
Yeah.
It's shifted so much water as it's come up that this 4-man raft, an air raft, has moved bodily 1 meter to the side.
Oh my God.
To allow for the current. She's stunned with her fly hanging out behind her, not even thinking to recast.
Yeah.
And me and a mate didn't even have the wherewithal to shout, get your fly back on the water.
It's frozen.
And then it disappeared, never to be seen again.
Oh my God, that's insane.
Beautiful memory.
Always the
and another one, we were in Iceland fishing for sea run Arctic char.
Oh, nice.
And again, Francis had to do a big cast into a cavity on the far bank. So we're talking like a 22, 23 meter cast into a cavity. And she performed this cast, but rather than the Arctic char eating it, a 20-pound sea trout, sea run brown trout, came up. It grabbed the indicator, came 1.5 meters out of the water, did some sort of triple turn, half pike, dropped back in. It didn't want to let go of the indicator, so she actually had it on for a while until eventually it did let go of the indicator.
Wow.
But spectacular.
That's amazing.
And I think
that's the first time
I often think those fish you don't catch provide better memories than the ones you do. So.
Totally, yeah. Especially like catching one on an indicator that in that way. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And staying on the indicator for a while.
Just for a while. It's something you can do. You can actually break the hook off a fly and cast to a fish. And it's amazing how long not always, but often it's amazing how long a fish will hold that fly before it spits it out.
Like they're actually fighting. They think they're actually fighting the bug. They're like, this is a strong bug. Yeah.
This is a strong.
Just while we were on that, in Tasmania, we don't actually have any dangerous animals, like I say, but we do have lots of snakes. So our tiger snake, there's a thing that's usually about 1 meter long, usually black, can be tiger coloured, usually black. It's poisonous, but they're not aggressive. So we just don't worry about them too much. Mm-hmm. They have most of their diet is tadpoles and frogs. So when you're fishing for tailing fish in the marshes on a warm October day, if I've got friends with me, a really cool thing to do is you break the hook off your fly and you cast your fly to a tiger snake, and it'll eat that fly straight away.
Yeah.
And they really don't want to give it up. Like you can drag them 1 meter or 1.5 meters before they decide to spit it out.
Yeah. That's amazing. That would be something we do with Yilma, because Yilma's terrified of snakes and bears and any kind of thing like that, right? Yilma, that would be perfect, right? Oh, his fire alarm is on. He just messaged the group chat, so it's going off. All right, go back on mute then, Yilma. I love that. Okay, so number 4 is why do you fly fish? And we've touched on it a little bit, but just to reiterate, I guess, why is it that you keep going out there to fly fish? What do you get out of it?
Okay, so for if I had 1 million lifestyles, I could do 1 million lifetimes. I could do 1 million different things. Mm. But like I said, for me, fishing is all about nature. I'm not naturally coordinated like my wife, and so I fish well these days. But I do a lot of practice to be able to fish well. Mm. I think I love observing nature, and when I observe nature, I have questions, and the only way you can answer those questions is to test your theories.
Yeah.
And fly fishing enables me to do that. If I was a photographer, which I would really enjoy doing, just photographing wildlife, the hunt would still be there in that situation. But I just wouldn't have the opportunity to test the things that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And also it's been interesting. I don't think I'd ever be a good enough photographer to do stuff that other people hadn't done.
Right.
But with fishing, I've been really fortunate in that I've been able to do stuff that no one else has ever done before, and then to be able to introduce other people to those concepts and ideas and places.
Yeah, it's kind
Those
of like
photos that you sent, are those from you? Like, is this from your camera? You took those pictures?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're wonderful, by the way.
beautiful photos. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
thanks.
really nice,
Amazing.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, they're just nowhere. The magazine that I write for most, Fly Life, which is actually Rob Sloan, the guy I was telling you about, wrote the truth about trout.
Yeah.
He's the founding editor of that magazine.
Okay.
The photographers in that just smash my ass, guys. And the only reason I take halfway decent photos is I'm interested in words. And the only way I can sell my words is to try and compete with these red hot photographers from mainland Australia and New Zealand. They're extraordinary. Like,
there's some amazing.
have a look. A lot of the Fly Life, you can look at back issues online.
Yeah.
Particularly in the last 20 or 30 issues when the technology's got good.
Yeah.
Just have a look at what they're doing. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
It really is incredible. And I think, like social media and stuff's like almost pushed people even more to like get more creative. And it's true. Like some of the fly fishing photography out there is just, it's insane. Like, it's like amazing.
It is. There are two guys that you should look at in particular. I'm thinking of a fellow by the name of Peter Broomhall.
Okay.
And you can Google up some of his shots. He is absolutely great at getting those photographs of a fish in midair with a mayfly in its mouth.
Right.
Right.
He's so good that when I need photos like that, I'll ring Peter up and say, Peter, I need a photo of a brown trout eating a damselfly midair.
He's like,
and it'll say, okay, well, the weather's good. Let's go here. We'll get them today. And we'll go out. We'll spend the afternoon and I will have my choice of 30 shots.
That's awesome. Wow.
And you can see some of them, on his website.
Yeah.
Another guy is a fellow called Stephen Uy, OI.
Okay.
And he's like Peter. He can just do all that stuff.
Yeah.
They're brilliant photographers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
And another fella, Brad Harris, who doesn't do so much that fish grabbing little animals, but his scenery shots and his human shots, like two anglers sitting on a bank having a chat.
Yeah.
We can all photograph that, but I certainly can't capture all the mood and stuff that I want to get in a situation like that. Brad can.
That's the key, right?
Right. Yeah.
Capturing like the mood, like you say, the mood, the feeling, like and actually communicating that with a photo. That's right. That is the challenge.
Yeah.
Okay, number 5, Mitch's Fishies 5 is what fly pattern represents you best and why? If you were a fly, what would you be?
Oh golly, there's a
That's one of the question we like the most, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
We've had enough. We've had a lot of woolly buggers.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Well, I would probably be a mouse fly, I reckon, because because a mouse fly, well, they're sort of woolly and wild and get drunk a lot.
Yeah.
And fall in water and get whacked. So that's pretty much me. Right? But I do want to point out, while we're on that little topic here, in Tasmania and New Zealand particularly, we don't generally have that obsession with matching the hats.
Okay. Yeah.
I've fished all over the world, and I am prepared to go. I'm prepared to be quite adamant about this, that matching the hats doesn't matter a rat's.
Right.
Presentation is important, and often getting a trigger is important. So, for example, here in Tasmania, when fish are being very selective on blue damselflies, they need blue. They're not going to eat anything that doesn't have blue on it.
Right.
But does it have to look like a damselfly? Nah.
It just has to have blue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So often the good fly design here in Tasmania and New Zealand involves finding the trigger for those difficult feeders.
Yeah.
And then tying what Rob Sloan so memorably called a functional fly, one that will do the job and remain durable for your entire fishing session. And so we tend to go for functional flies over hatch flies.
I love it. Yeah, that's great. I mean,
and so we're going back to the mice again.
Yeah.
You go to New Zealand, and because mice feeding trout such a big thing, you can buy these beautiful mouse flies that look exactly like the real thing. I ran out of them once at night time when I was fishing, and didn't have anything else big enough to make a splash in the wake, which is what the fish are actually targeting.
Yeah.
So we went back to camp and we got a wine cork and we super glued it to a
No
hook.
way. That's awesome.
And it was perfect. And I just thought it was splash and wake, although my mates did say I reckon it was the alcohol. They do seem to get.
That's right. Exactly. I love that.
We're going after the Glenfiddich,
yeah. That's amazing. That's it for Mitch's Fishies 5. Mouse pattern. I love that. I think that's awesome. I don't think we've ever heard that before.
Only Gab.
Yeah, Gab. Yeah, maybe once. I love that though. Greg, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. Honestly,
you're welcome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Greg. That was great.
This has been super cool. This has been super cool.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Really, really cool chatting. And geez, if we're ever over in Australia, we gotta hit you up. Or if you come to Canada,
over, you've got my email. Look me up. We're fishing.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Amazing. Okay.
Even in New Zealand, if we go to New Zealand first, we'll let you know.
You do. I'm over in New Zealand all the time, so
it's awesome.
High likelihood that I would be there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or I could always just regular trip over there.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, it was pretty cheap to go from Tasmania to New Zealand. I don't know what's going to happen. Australia won't have its borders open in 2021.
Yeah.
Okay. So we, unlike you guys, we basically have no COVID in Australia.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, reading about.
we have had them, but we've put the lid on it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And in mainland Australia, we get an outbreak every month or so, and it will be disastrous. 7 people will get COVID.
Wow, jeez.
But everything is shut down straight away. Like it's not. This is a massive lockdown until the threat's over.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
So smart.
But it does mean.
It's not like that here.
Travel for us for at least 12 months, probably 18 months.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, next year we'll get together and we'll go toss some mice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
Sounds good.
I love it. Wicked. Thanks so much again, Greg, for chatting.
You're welcome.
And that's
Thanks,
See you guys.
Take care.
Have a good day.
Thanks. Thank you.
See you, Greg. Super nice guy.
I love talking to authors.
I know. He's so smart and just well spoken and
storytell exactly.
Articulates thoughts so well,
Yeah, you hang on every word.
Yeah, 100%. No, it was.
Are we recording right now?
Of course, we're recording right now, man. We're always recording.
Holy shit! I didn't know if you started or not. Yeah, no, it's so great.
Always recording. Always.
I mean, always recording. I mean, I have his book, The Imperiled Cutthroat, which we didn't even get to. But I mean, what are you supposed to do with a guy that has a career that long? It's like. It's crazy. But I mean, I guess you can boil it down to it's pretty interesting that his fishing turned into a passion for writing, which then turned into a passion for conservation, and then that's what kind of is guiding compass. I mean, that's what Imperiled Cutthroat's all about, right? It's all about
absolutely.
These wild, he's mentioned wild species is something that's
I think that we got to have him on again to talk about the cutthroat and just to talk about Imperiled Cutthroat, because there's so much we could talk about just in North America that he's fished and understands, and we didn't even touch. We talked about where he's from and stuff, and a little bit on.
Well, I think that makes sense because I've never talked about Tasmania ever.
I know.
Ever.
I know.
I didn't even. I actually never brought it up. I never.
The first time I sort of heard about it was from one of our listeners down in Tasmania. Hold on, let me pull that up because I was like, that was when I was like, whoa, we have a listener in Tasmania? This was a couple of years ago.
Although, did you change your background? Did you rearrange your house? It looks so neat and tidy.
No, it's the same as it always is, man.
There it is. Dr. Mark James Frizzo. He sent us an email in 2018, and he's like, oh, I just wanted to say, I like your podcast. He's in, his brother and him have a cabin in the Central Highlands of Tasmania. And he says, every time a brown or rainbow took the dry fly, my brother would exclaim, it's a tarpon, deluded fool. He's just talking about one of the tarpon episodes we did. But but man, yeah, he's and he's saying too, he's if you ever find yourself in New Zealand or Australia, let us know. We got to hit this guy up too, because that was a couple years ago.
One day we'll get down there and spend a good amount of time down there.
Cabin in the Tasmanian
if I'm flying that far, I'm going to stay there for a while.
I'm going to stay there for a couple months.
Oh yeah, we'll do a whole month down there and hit up New Zealand, and then
it'd be cool because we fished for me and Gab anyway, fish for Yellowstone cutthroat with Chloe.
Yep.
It'd be kind of cool to like, if we did another trip with Chloe, then do a podcast with him about talk all about the cutthroat,
Oh, absolutely. That'd
Yellowstone cutthroat, because
be dope. That'd be super cool.
we have somebody who guides Yellowstone cutthroat.
100%. I'm looking up right now just the Western Lakes in Tasmania. I wanted to just Google image it because the way he explained it, I was like, God, that sounds amazing.
And we'll, folks, we'll put all this in the show notes if you guys want to check out some of Greg's articles
definitely.
and his books as well.
And we'll do a couple posts on Instagram too. So if you can check out our Instagram at the Soulfly Crew, you'll see some of these amazing photos that Greg's taken and sent us. And they, if you're in Canada listening, or if you're even just listening during a winter and you're kind of a little stir crazy, they will get you so jazzed, to go outside. I was like, oh man, like the trailer for Leviathan. There's like the scene where Greg catches this ridiculous brown trout in like a creek.
Ridiculous brown trout.
And
the creek is like as big as my table. Like it's as wide as like my dining room table.
It looks
It's
like
so
he's
tiny.
like netting like a coho. I was
Yeah.
like, Jesus.
It looked like a steelhead with spots.
It was insane. I was like, okay, that's a giant fish.
It's wild.
I really
Wild.
like talking to Greg. He was super cool. I would definitely want to have him
Super
on
cool.
again if he's down because, he talked about advocacy and fighting for nature and stuff like that, which is obviously we've been talking about so much. Like,
It's been a common theme in a couple of our podcasts now. It's like what the dilemma of is it a dilemma? Yeah, well, maybe not a dilemma, but like best way of how do you tell people about a space to protect it with not having the adverse effect of that space being ruined, right?
Exactly, yeah.
It's
And
like
he
how
said
do you
it
inspire
perfectly.
how do you inspire people
Yeah,
to
I love that.
He said
how
it
do you inspire
perfectly.
people to enjoy a space
Yeah.
while at the same time not
He said it absolutely perfectly. I never heard anyone say it. Give them the recipe. He's like,
Recipe.
here's where you find fish. If you see that in nature, that's what you look for. Like, there, go look for it. Not like, here's the spot. Here's what you look for. And this is the recipe for how you do it. Now you go and do it, make the cake yourself. That's the perfect way to put it, like it's right. Like that's what I think a lot of the people that post online and stuff like that, that's what they're doing. They're just giving people, getting people fired up to go out and explore themselves. And I think that's great. Absolutely. I think that's great.
Yeah, man. Like even from us, like please go to Temagami. You try and figure it out.
Yeah, we don't know
tell
anything about.
Yeah,
And you can tell
absolutely.
us how to catch fish.
Temagami. Fuck Temagami.
Oh, I love fishing. I can't wait to go fishing in Temagami. Oh my god.
Oh no. These past two episodes with Rich and Greg have really got the wanderlust
Yeah, that's a great way to
all
put it.
time
At
at an all-time high. Like South Africa and then Tasmania. I'm like,
Oh my
okay.
God. And then when he was talking about fishing on the Rainbow Trout River by Machu Picchu, I was just like, God.
What?
I was like, that's would be so fun. That's the most ridiculously fun thing I've ever heard. But being stuck in that little town, that COVID. I mean, even just hearing about all that, I'm like, that sounds so fucking fun. I want to go do that right now. Like,
Well, when the world was shutting down, I was like, and we were in Tobago, I was like, well, I guess I'll just get really good
Totally.
at saltwater fishing and making roti.
become
Yeah,
a
we were
guide
thinking
and a
that.
roti.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly what all those said.
So
He's like,
Roti.
I was like, if the worst comes to worst,
Yeah.
I guess we'll just get really good at saltwater fishing.
Oh my God, I know. Honestly, can you
And let's
imagine
hope we don't run out of tippet.
being
Because there's no fly shops in Tobago.
Oh, that's right. Can you imagine? You guys would have to make your own. Like,
yeah.
oh my God.
I would just start using like fishing line.
Honestly,
oh my
like,
God, that would have been amazing.
getting stuck in Tobago would not be so bad. You almost families down there. Like,
No, my family's there. We can
We also
stay
had
there.
like
it's
we had
sick.
things like we had our laptops. We had like we could have continued
worked.
our life there for a bit.
It'd be so wild. I would have
could've
been.
worked.
I missed that trip. I would have been so pissed if you guys are just like lagooned in friggin' Tobago, and I'm just like, got in Toronto, just like, okay, God.
But then you went to your cottage, so
Yeah, that's true. So, never mind.
That's true.
That's
I've
true.
never seen you so happy when you were working from your cottage, Mitch.
I mean, I don't know how you can get happier than that, right? Like,
Yeah,
that's the happiest thing in
you're
the
just
world.
working at the cottage. It's so sick.
Just working, air quotes, just working away at the cottage.
You were working. You're always online.
I know, I was always working too. But you know what? There's something not bad working when your feet are in a lake. It's not
Yeah.
bad. Well, great podcast, guys. That was super fun. I really like talking to Greg. And
That was awesome. Thanks,
yeah.
thanks, Greg, and you definitely check out his Many books. There are many books.
Yeah,
Some
we'll post-
fishy, some not so fishy.
Yeah, we'll just list them.
Check out his articles in Fly Life, and yeah, definitely check out Hatch and Leviathan. They, some of those videos were part of past F3Ts. You can probably find them that way, and YouTube, of course. And yeah, that was rad. That was great.
I do want to give a couple thank yous and a couple just sort of shout outs right now. And
whoa,
yeah, I'm gonna give a couple of thank yous. The first thank you is to Zoom. Because without Zoom, we wouldn't be able to chat to people like Greg across the, like we literally were talking to someone. It's Sunday for him. It's Saturday night for us on the other side of the world. And it's like, we're chatting about fishing. Like, that's ridiculous, So thanks, Zoom. You need a thank you.
Zoom, thank you. Mitch, can I add to Zoom?
Everyone's going to be like, are these guys sponsored by Zoom now?
No.
No, Mitch is just wasted.
Can you imagine if we were sponsored by Zoom? But the other thing I want to say was thanks to listeners, because we do all these things over Zoom now, and because of COVID. But so thanks for just, I know maybe the audio quality is not always the best it can be. But we appreciate you sticking in there and trekking through COVID with us. As soon as COVID's over, we'll be back in the studio, and we'll still be doing calls over Zoom because it's badass. But we'll be back in the studio, so the audio quality will get better.
Yilma's fire alarm won't be going off.
Yeah, exactly.
I know, exactly.
Exactly.
It's okay, man. It's just life these days,
Yeah.
Fire alarm's going off.
What was the other thing I was gonna say? Dang it! I wrote them down and then I closed my document and I didn't save it. But it was that, and then
What?
Oh man, I can't remember what it was. The other thing I was gonna say.
What,
Thanks.
like your thanks?
Yeah. I had like another thing I wanted to say before like we signed off. Oh shit! I'm not recording any of this. Can you imagine? I was gonna do that to Greg.
Oh my god!
I was gonna do that to Greg just to freak him out, but I was like, the internet's gonna chop out, and he's just gonna be like, "What? Like what the?"
You stupid idiots!
Like it's like, all right, Greg, that was the dry run. Now we're going back to the top. Let's do that again. Can you imagine? Oh my god. Yeah, I can't remember what the other thing I was gonna say was. So when I remember,
It's also it's always nice to get a. It's always nice when you have a. Oh, sorry.
No, go.
I was just saying, it's always nice when you have a guest who does all the talking for you.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like he's just like, and go. Like we had, like we have our little list of questions, and like.
Oh, that's what it was. I remember now.
We have our little list of guiding questions, and he's like answering them as he's going through his paragraphs of answers, and I'm just like, okay, well, I don't have to say anything.
Yeah, and that's the best because that's what this is all about, right? Like taking ourselves out of this as much as possible and letting them speak. And actually, that reminded me of what I was going to say because that's what Larry King said. How part of his interview styles, and Larry King passed away today. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Yes.
I was like, holy shit! And I know he was up there, but he was the king of interviews. He
was the Larry King
of interviews. Yes, he was, man. Oh my god! Go check out his interview with George Strombo on The Hour. Like he did an interview with him, and it's such a cool interview. I remember watching it years and years and years ago, and yeah, Larry King's one of my favorite interviewers. So
love
his voice.
Sad to hear that today, but anyway,
funny guy too. Many
super
cameos in many funny movies.
Yeah, very cool guy.
Well, this is February. This is coming out February 1st, so I hope everybody had a good January.
Yeah. Stay safe out there. This is our little PSA. Stay safe.
Stay safe.
Stay indoors. And catch you on the flippity flap. Thanks for listening to the show. That's my new sign off. Catch you on the flippity flap. Thanks everybody for listening to the show. It was a good one. That's it for me, Mitch. Aldo.
Bye, everybody.
Yilma.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Take care.
You can find all of SoFly's content at SoFly.ca. On Instagram, we're at the SoFly Crew. You can reach us at thesoflycrew@gmail.com with any questions, comments, or concerns. On Facebook, we're SoFly, and our podcast is available on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify.